All right, welcome everybody. It's good to see you. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Not exactly the night that we had hoped for in terms of getting people here, but you all made it, so hopefully no one's frozen out in Rittenhouse right now. My name's Eli Storch. I chair the Design Advocacy Group. I'm glad you found us. As many of you know, this is our first time here in a new venue. We departed from the Center for Design Philadelphia as of last month and are on our migratory 2026 tour that will be here. It will be at the new Village of Industry and Arts on Broad Street and other places that we don't yet know. So it will be an exciting year. Thank you all for coming out and for joining us tonight for a really great presentation. So as is custom with DAG, we like to connect with our community, make sure we know who's around us. So I'm going to start this watch that I'm not wearing and let you guys chat with someone probably within an arm's reach of you for about 60 seconds. Say hi, figure out why they're here, and then I'll call you back in a minute. They usually shut up pretty quickly on one side. All right, let's exchange some email addresses and bring it back in here. All right, thank you, everybody. So we're going to jump in. We're going to go through some advocacy items, some things that are relevant and going on around the city before we get into our program tonight. So first up, George, do you want to say a few words about what's on screen here? You, George.
And we're done.
Sorry. My first official act, I disconnected the screen. George Claflin, one of two vice chairs. Two very sad pieces of news that many of you are already aware of. I think we've lost two giants each in their respective fields in the last month and a half. Frank Matero of University of Pennsylvania Preservation Program, really one of the most incredibly energetic and positive scholars I can think of that worthy of a memorial service. The other is Joseph Sternick, who came to DAG this fall, and we will have a very large bridge to remember him by along the river. So I'm not here to give a proper eulogy, but I think I should acknowledge those two things.
We're working on it. Just keep vamping.
Keep vamping. On Friday morning, I was able to photograph the immediate evidence of the state-sponsored vandalism, you might say, at the president's house. And we've managed to lose the connection here. I'm so sorry. And again, I won't go into great detail about how annoyed we are. I mean, DAG has gone on record against this act a long time ago, and it's clear that there was no actual preparation for this. They just ripped the material off, and there's a photograph of these very expensive boards sitting on top of each other in a pickup truck. There's a number of museums and organizations that would be, I think, the good home for these boards, hopefully temporarily before they go back up. And if you haven't seen the Inquirer today, there's 3 wonderful articles, including a lengthy interview with Troy Leonard, who was a senior member of Kelly Maiello and worked closely with Emmanuel Kelly on almost all of the decisions and meetings involving the President's House. So it was there's a lot to learn in the Inquirer today. We have a cordial relationship with Michael Ward, who is one of the founders and organizers of Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. And Marcia was privileged, has been privileged to attend a couple of recent meetings on this, and I'm going to ask her if she would like to comment on what the Avenging the Ancestors group is saying and doing at the moment. The other thing, if you will, be able to see these pictures of the house has changed a lot because people are providing, just as they do when someone is killed on the roadside. The President's House is now picking up little memorials and very transient but very emotional comments by the public and by teachers and by children. So in fact, this may be a bit of an organizing device because it has thrown this horrible attitude into the public sphere. And there's no reason, in my opinion, that this hard work of scholarship and debate that took over a decade to create should ever have been treated this way.
Can I come up here, Marcia?
Thanks, George. And I made a few notes so that I would remember what I heard last night. So there were about 300 supporters who attended last evening's attack meeting, which is Avenging Our Ancestors Coalition. DAG is, as George indicated, a part of this very broad-based coalition. And as you know, we invited Michael Cord, the founder of ATTAC, to speak several months ago. He was the founder. It was announced last night at the meeting that the city of Philadelphia had sued Doug Burgum and the National Park Agency to restore the panels. Governor Shapiro's office filed an amicus brief in support of the city's suit. And ATTAC's legal team announced a hearing to be held on Friday at 601 Market Street at 10:30 a.m. All of you are welcome. And that would be asking for no further desecration of the President's house, referring to the stone wall, the wall which has the engraving of the names of the 9 enslaved people and the original archaeological dig. The slavery memorial must be restored for our 250th anniversary. ATTAC has the artists to reconstruct the panels, and it's committed to the restoration for the city's celebration. And if restoration doesn't occur in the next 30 days, then ATTAC will escalate its campaign. There is concurrently a huge media campaign which was launched last night, and it's titled, "Tell the Truth, Restore Our History." It's a call for courage and collective action, and all of you are invited to participate in some way. There are tons of committees and ways that you can become active. Just go on to ATTAC's website to find out. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. So for the time being, while they search for an adapter, you're going to have to assume that we have tremendously compelling slides up here to talk about. A few other advocacy items. One pertains to someone who's on the stage right now, actually all three of them. Councilman Squilla introduced a bill that many of us consider to be pretty dangerous and damaging to the state of preservation in Philadelphia. And both Paul and Hannah have been working pretty hard behind the scenes to right some wrongs there and rebuild that bill into something that is actually a good thing rather than a pretty exclusively negative thing. So do one of you want to give a little update on where that stands as much as you can?
Thank you, Eli, and good evening, everyone. Paul Steinke from the Preservation Alliance. Just one additional comment on the President's House site desecration that took place last week and that the Alliance has been very much engaged with, dating back to when we led the writing of a letter co-signed by 50 historic preservation organizations to Secretary Burgum last September. DAG was one of the signers, urging them not to do what they wound up doing last Thursday. But if you're hearing people talk about the idea, this has been out there, it's a good idea on the surface, of mounting replica exhibits to what was at the President's House site somewhere nearby on city property or in private property. The folks behind the lawsuit, the city lawsuit, are recommending that not be done. Why? Because it could undermine the city's claim of irreparable harm that has been done. Because the feds could just say, well, it's across the street. You can go, public can go see it there. There's no harm here. And so ATTAC is making the point very strongly that the exhibits belong at 6th and Market, where President and Martha Washington resided, where they had enslaved workers on that site, where the archaeological remains of those residences can be found on federal property. That is the only place where the President's House slavery memorial belongs, and to do anything else is irreparable harm. So that's why you're not seeing a rush to put up the placards or the plaques elsewhere. So just keep that under your hat while we see what happens on Friday, because Friday the city has asked for a preliminary injunction against what happened and the immediate restoration of the President's House site. So fingers crossed, the judge, whoever he or she may be, will rule in favor of the city's motion. Now, on the subject of Councilman Squilla's bill that Eli raised.
You can scroll through the slides now.
Oh, okay. Congratulations. George, please be seated.
There's 4 slides there about the President's House.
Yeah, so you're
Yeah. So Councilman Squilla introduced a bill right around Thanksgiving that would significantly weaken the city's historic preservation bill. We had been talking to him for almost a year about introducing legislation that would do the opposite. But he was also getting pressure from development interests to introduce the bill that we see now. And in the end, he introduced that one. He said to jumpstart a conversation about historic preservation. It became clear to us that he wasn't fully cognizant of the implications of the bill that he introduced. To his credit, he has convened a small group of handpicked by him, stakeholders that includes the Preservation Alliance and the Chestnut Hill Conservancy and others, who have now had 3 meetings since Thanksgiving to discuss our concerns with the bill. The councilman has been presiding over these meetings in a very organized and methodical way, and we're not done yet. There's a 4th one being scheduled. The city law department is in those meetings, the planning commission, the historical commission. So it is becoming clear that the bill that was introduced in November will be rewritten, and we are doing our best to push it in a direction where the bill does not weaken the city's preservation ordinance, but strengthens it. And the longer this takes, the better it is for our side, frankly, because that's where the momentum is going. So the last chapter of this has yet to be written, but we feel like we are moving in the right direction. The Councilman Squilla is listening. He's taking our concerns into account, and we're hoping for the best.
Thank you. Good. That's worthy of a round of applause. And now I don't even have to do your introduction. All right. So a couple other things to talk about. An unfortunate one, in Dag's opinion, is the decision to move the Rocky statue to the top of the Art Museum stairs. Dag spoke up on this, and it has a good spot. It works well. It works well with traffic circulation, and you don't have to obstruct either the view of the Art Museum or the view from the Art Museum with the line and the people and inevitably trying to move the Rocky shop up there. Yet the Art Commission voted in favor of moving it. Inga Saffron had a really nice article talking about the privatization of public space and all that's happening specifically around the Art Museum grounds, but also around Philadelphia. So that one's worth the read. A frustrating loss on that one, but hopefully some more to come as folks realize what that's going to mean for the future of that historic site. An interesting one to follow, Councilman Young has introduced his, we'll call it spot zoning overlay at the Hahnemann campus, and a number of permits have been pulled preemptively to try and fight against that. This is not how you develop cities. It's just not, in my opinion. I will say as sort of, I led the team that designed the building on the screen as an adaptive reuse and for Brandywine Real Estate Trust, and they're trying to develop it into apartments because the building is obsolete for its current use. Now, whether other people agree or disagree with that, that's a fair conversation to have, but to spot zone an area in the hopes of future economic it doesn't make a lot of sense. And Councilman Young, and I don't think has articulated his position terribly well. So there's going to be a lot of interesting fights to be had over there, but you can see that number of apartments with permits being pulled preemptively ahead of that bill going to pass. So there will be more there, and there may be some programming for us to do on that. So watch that space. I keep this slide in the deck. Transit Forward Philadelphia does a great job. Check in with them. This fight is going on. We need to keep protecting SEPTA and securing long-term funding for the organization to make sure everything is running well and we're actually planning for the future, not just reacting to whatever problems come our way. So Transit Forward Philadelphia, they're all over the place, and you can connect with them easily, and they appreciate the help and support. Our next event, which will be here in 1 week's time with Alan Greenberger, we're going to go through his career, not just from founding DAG to now 25 years later, but his actual professional career as well. Our own George Claflin of Breaking the Wire a few minutes ago. George will be leading that. I'm going to buy two. So George will be leading that conversation, and it'll be a really interesting conversation spanning the length of Alan's career and looking at where the city is now and the cycles that he's seen throughout his time professionally. And then in March, we are locking in a final date, but it will be with Raheem Manning, who is Philadelphia's night mayor, who is focused on the night economy of Philadelphia and making sure that all of those activities are properly supported and are working as best they can to make sure Philadelphia is vibrant around the clock. So pay attention to your emails. It might be here, it might be somewhere else. As I mentioned, we're migratory this year, so look for some more information on that. So let's jump into it. you guys know Paul. We've been over Paul. He's a friend of DAG. He's someone who we've collaborated with a lot over the years, and he's the executive director of the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia, and has been since June of 2016. So coming up on 10 years.
They've gone fast.
So Paul also serves on the board of the directors of the Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance, National Preservation Partners Network, Temple University Libraries, Logan Square Neighborhood Association, and the City and State PA Advisory Board. He's also been named on Mayor Parker's Home Advisory Committee and the Market East Advisory Group. So he's a good guy to know. And also with us, Donovan Ripkema. Welcome, Donovan, the president of Heritage Strategies International and principal of PlaceEconomics. He's working at the nexus of historic preservation and economic development, and he's undertaken assignments in 49 U.S. states and nearly 60 countries. Recent projects, other than what he's going to share with us tonight, include studies of the impact of historic preservation in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and recommendations for incentives for modern heritage in Abu Dhabi. Serves on the Real Estate Market Advisory Committee of the UN Economic Commission for Europe, the Board of Directors of Global Urban Development, and the Advisory Board of the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network. And our third member of our team tonight, Hannah Stark, is the Director of Policy and Communications at the Preservation Alliance, where she advocates for policies that protect historic space while encouraging sustainable development. Hannah enjoys translating complex preservation policy initiatives into accessible and actionable advocacy strategies at the federal, state, and local levels. And prior to her current role, she served as the Policy Communications Coordinator for the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Government Relations Department. So, you can turn that off, Nika. And with that, please take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Leah. And looking out over the audience, I see several current and former board members of the Alliance. There's Donna Harris, there's Sally Elk, Kathy Dowdell, who was once the chair, and Leah Silverstein, who I think is on her way, but is the chair, she's here, chair of our advocacy committee, who had a lot to do with the work you're going to hear about tonight. So why did we take on this project of looking at the economic impact of historic preservation in Philadelphia? Well, first of all, it's something we wanted to do for a very long time. I always like to think of Philadelphia as the nation's most historic city, both in terms of what this city has meant to the nation in every period of its development, and also what we have preserved going back to the colonial era. I don't care what Boston says, I don't care what Charleston says, this is the most historic city in America. And we have a lot. And in terms of historic preservation, we have a lot to be proud of. We've not only have we preserved a lot, but we've done a lot in terms of public policy. One of the first major cities to have a historical commission or landmark commission, for example, 1955. We are a major consumer of historic tax credits, as you'll see in this presentation. So Philadelphia has a lot to be proud of when it comes to historic preservation. I'll also point to the Society Hill project as another example. But at the same time, we often seem to encounter resistance to preservation and a misunderstanding of what preservation means to the economy of the city. Too many people misperceive preservation as really just about preserving 18th century, early 19th century Society Hill townhouses, for example. Very important, but that's not all of what preservation is. And too many people misunderstand preservation as having to do with restricting development, impeding growth, restricting urban density. And we knew that that wasn't true and have known it for a long time, but we didn't have the data to prove it. And now we do, and that's what you're going to hear about tonight. So we did this to persuade the city as a whole, to persuade opinion makers, policy makers, people who care about the built environment, that historic preservation isn't just a nice to have, it's essential to Philadelphia's continued growth and development. So with that introduction, I'm going to introduce next, well, you've already heard about Donovan, and he's going to come up and take it from here.
Before I start, I want to ask a question. Are all of you people nuts? What the hell are you doing here at the 90 degrees below zero out there? If I didn't have to be here, I wouldn't be here. So thanks very much for braving. I mean, you are crazy, but for being here. So our firm is PlaceEconomics, and what we do, and Paul mentioned it, all the stuff we do is at the intersection of heritage and economics. And about half of that work in the U.S. is these kind of studies of measuring usually on a city level, the impacts of historic preservation. So we've done it in big places. This is the most historic city we've ever done one in, I will say that. But so we've done it in large cities in New York and LA and San Antonio and Phoenix, kind of mid-sized Indianapolis and Raleigh and Columbia, South Carolina, and then some little places, Cumberland, Maryland, and Saratoga Springs, New York, and Frankfort, Kentucky. We're always in the learning mode. So every time we do one, we say, oh, geez, there's something else we could look at the next time around. So we really enjoyed this opportunity coming to Philly. I don't know, 10,000 years or so, I've been teaching a class on Tuesday mornings at Penn. But all I know of Philadelphia prior to this thing was the 6 blocks from the 30th Street station to the Penn campus. I live in New York. I mean, I live in Washington. So I come up on the train on Tuesdays and walk up to campus, teach for 3 hours, take 2 students to lunch, and go home. But so when we came up here, we take great pride in literally being on the ground in every local historic district when we do these studies. And so Hannah got us to every district. So I saw tons of Philly that I'd never seen before. Just so you know that the study itself, and we spent a long time talking about kind of what would be included and what things were really 3 big pieces. The demographic diversity in historic districts and how that compares to the city as a whole. The creation, what it means to do particularly Tax Act rehabilitation, and so we measured that in terms of numbers of jobs, labor and income, local taxes generated. And then and the third, so the other one that really is important, I think, especially in Philly, and that is the role of older housing, whether or not it's designated, whether or not it ought to be designated, but the role of just older stuff, of which you might not know, you have a bunch of it here, plays in providing housing affordability. And in our recent studies, clients, we've kind of suggested it, clients always get it. They say, we absolutely need to do that. So those are the 3 pieces, and among the 3 of us, we'll talk about all of them. But just to give you a kind of high-level sense of how we do stuff, we have very, very robust, defensible, transparent methodologies. But we don't write master's thesis for other scholars. We write it for actually human beings can read it and understand it. And my colleague Caitlin Cotton is a fabulous designer, so we do all the design stuff. And they're like user friendly to read, so we do that. And not to diminish the robustness of the research, but it's just we want people, not just some PhD student to read them. So we used census data at the lowest level possible, the census block, to look very closely. We used cities assessment data and other data from the city, and GI and shape files. I don't even know what a shape file is, my young colleagues do. GIS shape files, so we could narrow down exactly what we were looking at. We got tax credit stuff from the State Historic Preservation Office. We buy a data set called IMPLAN. IMPLAN's a gargantuan econometric model, but we can tease out of that using saying, here's how much was spent in rehabilitating historic building. What does that mean in terms of jobs, labor income, local taxes? One of the things in the report was kind of something we invented. And you don't have to philosophically agree with this, but we kind of feel as a firm that healthy neighborhoods are one that have economic integration within the neighborhood. That it's just a healthy thing for people with a lot of money live next to somebody who's not much. You don't have to agree with that. We can believe in that. And so we've kind of developed this measurement called economic integration. And it is how closely does the distribution of income within a neighborhood parallel the city as a whole, income distribution in the city as a whole. And we looked at every local historic district in that regard. And some of them skew rich, some of them skew poor, but to a large extent, the historic districts are a reflection of who lives there. And we try to do not just the what is happening, but why it's happening. So this issue that I suppose Hannah will talk about density, really, I think really important issue. We talk about why that's true, the fact of the nature of the building stock, the typology of the properties, and so it's kind of a surprise often to people in City Hall or planning offices to say, we need density, we got to get rid of those historic districts, when in fact, what's true every place we've looked, and it's true in Philadelphia. In fact, historic districts are the densest places in town. So that was just kind of as background. I'll turn it over to Hannah to talk about demographics.
Thanks, Donovan. Thanks, everyone. So as Donovan said, one of the first things we wanted to look at, kind of table setting, was understanding what is actually designated in Philadelphia. We can't really start any of this demographic understanding unless we really know what is locally designated. And so the first thing that we really wanted to look at specifically was the rate of designation. Back in 2017, when former Mayor Kenny did his Historic Preservation Task Force, there was a similar survey done, and it showed that back in 2017, only 2.2% of the city was designated, and there was a comparable study done for the 50 largest cities in the nation, and if you average that, that was a 4.3%. So back in 2017, a lot of people really wanted to bolster our rate of designation to meet that national average. And now we know we do. We're at 4.8%, which is really great when you think that we are the most historic city in the country. So that was where we started this report at, knowing what land area is actually regulated by the Historical Commission. And then we were able to go in to look at the historic districts themselves. So when we started to look at this, Donovan started to talk about this a bit. We were really concerned about density and how are our historic districts contributing to that, because we felt that that was true, but now we have the data to prove it. And now through Donovan's research, we found out that historic districts density is 34% higher than undesignated neighborhoods. And we really wanted to think about that why, as Donovan said. So when you look at the fact that 79% of housing units in historic districts are in residential buildings that have 2 or more units. So think about that. That is a different type of housing typology than you might think of. So you're thinking about in Spruce Hill, the big twins that now have 6 apartments in them. Or you're thinking about up in Northwest Philadelphia in the new thematic apartment historic district. There are a lot of multifamily residential within these historic districts which contribute to that density. And we also wanted to think about growth. We didn't just want to know, have these always been the densest areas in the city? Is this just why they're dense? But actually, from 2013 to 2023, we saw 26% growth in the number of housing units in historic districts, whereas there was only 10% of that growth citywide. So when we're thinking about how we champion historic districts and why historic districts are a benefit for our city, we are really finding out that preservation can support compact, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. And we think that this data will help us show how district designation can coexist with growth and change in our city at large. I think I will now turn it back to Donovan to talk a little bit about older housing and affordability.
Yeah, I'm glad we don't have to walk back and forth across those corridors and be torn out 16 times. As Hannah was talking, I remembered a kind of factoid that I usually tell my students at Penn. I remember the 2010 census, big headlines in the Philadelphia newspaper. We've finally turned the corner. After 50 years of declining population, we've finally started to grow again. Not much, but at least we're starting to grow. We've turned the corner. Except that wasn't true. The historic districts in Philadelphia grew. The rest of the city still lost population. It is, and we've now looked, just as an aside, we've looked at a bunch of cities, kind of Rust Belt, Northeast cities, that had long periods of population decline and then turned around in every one of them. When the turnaround happens, it happens first in historic districts. It's what draws people to cities. But that's not what I'm supposed to be talking about. So this issue about the role of older housing, because every place in America now has or thinks they have a housing affordability issue. And so we as a firm have really taken the position we need to be looking at the contribution of older housing stock as it provides affordability. So it really interesting in Philly is that 67%, I think, of the 67 of the residential buildings were built before 1950, and half of the units are older than 1950. So here's our methodology we invented. We just invent stuff to compare the characteristics of these older neighborhoods with the city as a whole. So we looked at the census block level, and the census block is usually 6 or 8 city blocks, a pretty small kind of neighborhood proxy area. We looked at those where 70% or more of the dwellings were built prior to 1950. And so what you see on the map are those the places where that test was made. And so we looked at, and about 83% on average overall in those areas were built prior to 1950. And so we looked at the characteristics of those areas with the rest of the city. And what we found is that they're more affordable. There's a greater both black population and Hispanic population. There are higher degrees of black home ownership and growing in those areas. There's this concept called housing cost burdened, and it's high every place, but it's no higher in those areas than the rest, even though the income levels are significantly lower than in the rest of the city. So all of these things about affordability, in fact, they're being met in these older neighborhoods. From a policy perspective, just shouting out loud. You don't have to care about gargoyles and cornices. If you care about affordable housing, the number one priority in Philadelphia has to be, how do we keep that older housing stock in place? That's the priority. You'll never, ever going to build new your way out of housing affordability. It cannot happen. One of the facts of life, I come from the real estate development world originally. One of the facts of life is you cannot build new and rent or sell cheap. Cannot be done. And if we're going to have affordable housing, we got to do it with that housing stock. And the good part about it, it's great housing stock. Some of it underutilized, some of it needs some attention. But that's where the priority ought to be in this 30,000 housing units. That's where 29.9% of them, 99.9% should be. The units are smaller, and sometimes say, well, the market wants big places. But a third of all households in America are one person. You don't need 5,200 square feet for that. 60% of all households are either one or two persons. So that housing stock that you have in Philadelphia, older housing stock, that's good quality stuff and affordable, is where the priority has to be. So that's kind of the story on older housing, and Paul gets to talk about jobs. Oh, then you're going to talk about it. I don't care. Whoever's going to talk.
Thank you, Donovan. And I really want to hit the point home about housing. The reason we selected housing as one of these key topic areas is because we know right now that Mayor Parker is hyper-focused on her home plan. And we want to showcase how preservation can be a solution for that. That is why, Paul is on the advisory committee. He gets to go to those meetings and talk about this with the people who are making the choices. So we're really excited to have Donovan's data that showcases what older housing looks like in Philadelphia and how that can be reused to meet everyone's needs. And now I do get to talk about jobs and tax credits. So for our next scope of work, we were looking at the impact of rehabilitation projects, specifically projects that use historic tax credits. And that was there are many rehabilitation projects that happen in the city that don't use rehabilitation tax credits at the federal or state level, but this was the easiest data to really track. It had the granular information that Donovan's team needed to really analyze this, and we found out really interesting information just looking at the projects that actually use tax credits. So if you think about all the other rehabilitation projects that happen that we were not able to analyze without that data, it even could be even more than this. So the first interesting information that we found out, which again I think helps us believe that we are the most historic city in the country, is that when you look at the users of the federal historic tax credit, we're right at the top. That is us, Philadelphia. And look at the number of projects. Look at us compared to the second most city there in Chicago. 271 compared to 96. That is not just winning, that is a landslide victory. And then when you're also looking at QREs, it's really interesting. And for those who don't know what QREs are, that's the qualified rehabilitation expenditures. So going through the federal or state historic tax credit, that's just the dollars that you can actually say went into that rehabilitation project. That was actually the money that went towards the historic building themselves, not the landscaping outside. So really there are even more money that goes into these development projects, but we're just actually thinking of the dollars that go into the physical rehabilitation of the historic building itself. And really the information that we really wanted to get out of this is if you invest $100 in the rehabilitation of a historic building, that can generate a $45 return in additional economic activity in Philadelphia. So that's really powerful when we're trying to showcase that historic preservation and rehabilitation is a driver in economics. You know, you're thinking about how Donovan said we can't just build new, we have to preserve, and we think this data can really help make that case to decision makers. And as I said, that's just for QREs. That's just the dollars that go into it. So we also asked Donovan, well, what about the dollars that aren't calculated in that? And they were able to find that when you spend $100 in those qualified rehabilitation expenditures, there's also another $42 that is invested that also generates jobs, labor income, and local taxes. So it is even a bigger impact than we're able to showcase just through this data alone. And now, really fun data we think that we're able to showcase here. You know, we already talked about how we had almost 300 tax credit projects, which is really incredible. That alone is $4 billion in investment in our historic resources. Think about that. That is amazing to showcase the investment that we're able to give our historic buildings. And when you're thinking about that in other outputs, that's 2,500 jobs each year in tax credit activity. $141 million of labor income each year. $8.1 million in local tax revenue every year. And what we, again, thinking of housing as being a major issue right now, we wanted to take a look at how we can showcase that rehabilitation projects are contributing to more housing. We found that 7,900 housing units were created in the last 15 years. And so when we're really thinking about how this data can be used, we don't want, we love speaking to rooms like this, people who are involved in design and in this world, but we really want to be able to go and talk to policymakers about how important this is to our city and how we should be investing more and more resources. Think about if we had 600 rehabilitation projects. Would these numbers double? What would that look like if we put even more investment and resources into rehabilitating the historic spaces that we have all around the city? And I do want to just plug that this was just a very, we tried to do the highlights of each of these 3 sections, but I highly encourage you to look at the report, because if you want to know the economic impact report by city council district, that's in the appendix. So the level of detail that we can give to you tonight is really just the highlights, but there's so much in the report themselves. So if you did not get a little postcard when you walked in with a QR code to download the report, I highly encourage you to take a look at it. It's 60 pages. of really good data, and this really is just scratching the surface. But I also want to talk about, again, what this data means and how we can actually use it and not just have it sit on a bookshelf, because that's not what we want to do with this. We want to get this into the hands of decision makers, policy makers, and really think about how this can be related to the home plan with rehabilitation first priorities, making sure that we're investing in the programs that exist, but also in programs that might not exist yet that we can build to specifically focus on preservation, as well as also our state levels. You know, the Preservation Alliance has been a leader of the Pennsylvania Historic Tax Credit Coalition for 3 or 4 years now. We've been working with Preservation Pennsylvania because we talked about the federal historic tax credit, but Pennsylvania also has a state tax credit that's a complement to that. And as of October, it was only $5 million. Luckily, last July in the Pennsylvania budget, we were able to raise that to $20 million. So going forward in the tax credit round that opened in October, we're now able to give out $20 million to go to these type of projects. So think about, these numbers might be even higher with the fact that we now have quadrupled the amount of funding at the state level, and now we actually have the data to back it up when we go to talk to state legislators to showcase that these are the policies that we need to preserve and have a vibrant, dynamic city. And to further hit that point home, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to run through a bunch of very exciting projects that illustrate these different points, whether it's tax credit usage, housing. So I'm going to turn it back over to him. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Hannah. One of the things I've learned, going around town talking about preservation is it's never complete unless you show a bunch of pictures of pretty buildings, because that's when it really becomes fun. So I'm going to take you through a baker's dozen very quickly, a lightning round of preservation projects that we think are really illustrative of the economic impact and social impact and community impact that preservation can have and does have in our city. So this is a former carpet mill built in 1879 in Kensington at A in Indiana, which is now 48 affordable apartments. Architect was Barton and Partners for the conversion. This is, did it switch yet? No. Do it again. There we go. All right. This is one of our many landmark school buildings designed by Irwin Catherine. This is up at 12th and Spring Garden. And the school district moved out of it some years ago. Originally built in 1928, now affordable apartments for veterans and seniors. It's named for a local resident who was killed in Vietnam, Laurel Blevins. And the architect of this conversion was Kramer and Marks. Another converted school, this one by Project Home. The former Willard Elementary School is now the McGuire Residences, supportive housing for formerly homeless people. Architect was Kitchen Associates. You all know this one, the Divine Lorraine. If Alan Greenberger were here, I'd give him a big shout out because he was a big catalyst in getting this project done. Standing vacant on the North Philadelphia skyline for many, many years, and sort of a blight on the gateway to North Philly. And now it is a shining beacon at the gateway to North Philadelphia. 1894, originally designed by Willis Hale. This is another Project Home project, a former nurses' residence on the campus of Episcopal Hospital, vacant for many years. Project Home turned it into affordable apartments for formerly homeless people and people recovering from opioid addiction. And this was by CBP architects. Next one you're going to know too. I'm going to buy dinner for the first person who can shout out the name. Oh, you all said it at the same time. It was a tie. Guess I'm buying dinner for everybody. The Met, this building was almost demolished. Elle and I tagged it as imminently dangerous. And it was just a miracle it was not lost. And now I'm going there soon to see a concert. And many of you have probably done the same thing. This was AOS Architects. Another AOS Architects project was the conversion of this former Pico appliance showroom on North Broad Street into the Youth Build Charter School that just opened last year. A former department store, Germantown and Shelton, is now known as Vernon Lofts. It was originally C.A. Rao Department Store, and it's now Market Rate Apartments in the heart of Germantown. Design Blends Architects. This is the cover project for our Growing Through Preservation report, Bach, because we originally had some row houses on the cover. But then someone, it was probably Donovan, said, we really should pick an image that shows economic impact beyond residential. And Bach is probably one of the very best examples of recent times. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. 1938, Bach Vocational High School turned into a space with over 200 tenants, small businesses, makers, bakers, a rooftop bar and restaurant. It's got it all. And if you haven't been there, you must go. So kudos to Lindsay Scanapico and the Scout team for pulling that one off. In a building that was considered a white elephant, what would you ever do with that building? Off the beaten path in the middle of a residential neighborhood, and look what it is today. Similarly, in West Philly, the former Provident Mutual Life Insurance Company, designed by Ralph Adams Cram, built in 1925, sat vacant for years, just a shell, an empty shell. But using historic tax credits, it was converted into space for a unit of Children's Hospital, a unit of Philadelphia Health Management Corporation, and a K-3 charter school named for Octavius Catto. But you can applaud for that. And I think a lot of West Philly people thought that nothing like that would ever happen here, but it has. All right, number 11 of 13. This is the former Edith Jeshurun Synagogue, built in 1886. Over the years, it was home to Baptist, Lutheran, and Pentecostal congregations before going vacant and nearly being demolished. Converted, it's now Darna Lofts, a 22-unit market rate apartment project near 7th and Cecil B. Moore, and it was Raymond Rolla who was the architect of that conversion. Back to West Philly, the Parkside Avenue houses. How many of you know or knew about Jim Brown and what he did there? So many of you. I'm looking at Bob Thomas. He was the architect of some of it. Jim was a preservation hero in this town, passed away about 2 years ago, converted these vacant and falling down, beautiful late 19th, early 20th century houses into affordable apartments in the 80s and 90s. Well, time moves on. It's now the 2020s. It needed a refresh. So they were restored using historic tax credits. 16 buildings, 82 affordable apartments, and the architect here was Thrive in Design. And finally, another white elephant. What do you do with a former electric generation plant on the river that was decommissioned in 1986? Well, the answer is no one knew for almost 40 years what to do with it until Lubert Adler got a hold of it, invested over $100 million into it. It's now market rate apartments. There are 2 hotels in it, commercial space, and as of last fall, a brand new racket sports athletic club. It won, what was the prize it won from the National Trust? The Driehaus Foundation Award was given to this project at the Trust Conference last October in Milwaukee. So now the whole country knows about it. And the architect of this conversion was Strada. So I could go on, and I'd love to go on, but I keep you here all night. I think you get the point. As Hannah said, we do have these QR codes, these postcards with QR codes. You can download the report. It's also on our website. I do hope that you spend some time with it. We have been making the rounds of organizations around the city, ULI, the Development Workshop, scheduling something with the Building Industry Association. We had a briefing for City Council. And then one day last fall, Hannah and I ran around City Council dropping off copies of the report in every council office. I was scheduled to give the presentation to Mayor Parker's Home Advisory Committee last Thursday, but that was the day that she got council approval for the home project, so that meeting had to be rescheduled. But I am going to give this report there as well. So we're, as Leah on our board said right from the beginning, it's not enough just to do the report, it's what you do with it. And so thank you for being part of us doing something with it tonight.
So we do have time for some questions, so if you want to flag me down, raise your hand, I'll come around. Let me start out here, Hannah. Why does Pennsylvania have such a low state historic tax credit? And obviously you guys have done a lot of work, DAG signed on to your efforts. What do other states have relative to Pennsylvania, and what more can come from that?
Well, before last July, of all the surrounding states in Pennsylvania, including Delaware, every single state surrounding Pennsylvania had a higher historic tax credit than we did. Again, that is, Delaware had $8 million to give out, and up until last July, we only had $5 million to give out. So really think about that. The states, both West Virginia and New York, have an unlimited tax credit, so whoever applies, get the dollars. Again, we have 20 million. Right now, New Jersey has 50. Ohio had 120, they recently went down to 60. We only have $20 million. And while we were very proud to get that quadrupling of funding, the Tax Credit Coalition has not stopped our advocacy. Right now, the agency who administers that program can only give out the awards in $150,000 increments. Think about all the projects you just saw there. How much does $150,000 do to a capital stack? Nothing. So we are trying to raise that to at least $1.5 million. So if anyone in the room is interested in joining with the Pennsylvania Historic Tax Credit Coalition, we have members all around the Commonwealth. Our bill to raise the per project cap passed the Pennsylvania House of Representatives on June 30th. You might know what happened after June 30th. Your state government shut down until November. That was a holiday. So we're back in session now, so we are re-engaging our efforts, and we're hoping that maybe the state Senate will have also pass our bill to raise the per project cap. So now that we have $20 million to give out, they're not giving it out in measly $150,000 increments, because we want this to be a catalyst. We are the best at using the federal credit. We should also have a state credit that matches that. It's really just an absolute travesty that we don't. And imagine if we did have an unlimited tax credit and that was guaranteed to a percentage. Imagine what those numbers would be. It's not going to be 25,000 jobs. It's going to be so much more. So there really is, could have a tangible impact on if we improved the state historic tax credit program. So thanks, Eli. I love talking about the tax credit.
Hi, thanks for the terrific presentation. I'm so gratified to see the data of what I intuited, that this city and all the old houses and all the beautiful neighborhoods is consistent with economic development. But what I'd like to hear is a little bit more detail, or drill down a little bit. So I live in a 130, 140-year-old townhouse in West Philly. And what I think about is the leaky windows and the roof replacement and the skylight that doesn't quite work and all that sort of stuff. And so could you walk us through this gratifying and wonderful data that shows that lower income people benefit from the preservation of these houses and the preservation of our historic fabric. Is the big impact the large projects that Paul just showed, or is it the neighborhoods where people are able to incrementally invest in their house and stay in there? How do you square the circle of what the popular perception is of that these houses are expensive to maintain, and the reality that we know and we understand in our gut that preserving these houses improves affordability and improves the housing stock in our city?
Well, I'll take a start. Yes and yes to all of those things, and a couple of side comments. What's true with houses that are owned, and by the way, much higher ownership among minority populations in its own district and the rest of the city. What is true is people of modest means might not have the money. What's often missed in the affordable housing discussions is step one, you gotta keep houses that are in place being occupied, keep them affordable. And in fact, a priority ought to be how do we help people of modest means to keep those houses and keep low? One of my favorite incentives in America is in San Antonio, and it's called the Under One Roof program. And here's the city council member who's the big advocate says, look, what damages houses? Water. Where does water come from? The roof. So we're gonna fix the damn roofs. And it's just a straightforward grant program to fix roofs. And it's limited to people in older housing of modest means. And it's not very big, and it wouldn't fix a slate roof in Philadelphia. It's like $10,000. But in fact, it's keeping those houses affordable and in the hands of the modest income owners. And I think we just need to think about what are the tools that we need to do. As an aside for that, one of the pieces of legislation at the federal level that never made it, had over half the Republicans and Democrats signing on to it, but still didn't get out of committee, was basically, and it was called the historic homeowners tax credit. It basically took the model of the commercial tax credit and applied it to residents. You could do it with your historic home, same kind of 20%. And the magic of it was, okay, I make enough money, I have tax liability, I spend the money, I get the tax credit. Or I don't have enough money. I don't make enough money to have a tax liability. Well, the program was structured so that the bank would take it and in exchange for a lower interest rate for me. Or the developer could take it and turn that into a lower purchase price. It was a great program that you saw how effective the federal tax credit was. A commercial company would have been a great thing. And I think we need to think harder about what we do with people who are modest means so they can keep in their house, keep the historic property in its in the condition it needs. But you're also absolutely right. Sometimes we think about, well, these massive total rehabilitations. One of the magic about older housing stock is it can often be done incrementally. So we fix the windows, we fix the porch, we fix the whatever on a multi-stage, and it's kind of, the SHPO in Arizona has a great phrase for it. I don't know, it's incremental restoration or whatever. But that kind of incremental thing that both keeps them in operation and makes it more affordable.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things to Dan's question quickly. One is that Mayor Parker's home program is focused on providing loans and grants to a larger share of Philadelphia's homeowners, not specifically targeted to historically designated, but to older homes, because her goal is to create and restore 30,000 new units, roughly split between existing and new construction. So that's a big piece of the city's strategy on that, which the bond issue was just approved by City Council last week. Secondly, there are a number of states that do have a historic tax credit for homeowners. Pennsylvania is not one of them yet, but that could be a next frontier once we get Senate and Senate bill approved, because that could be a powerful incentive, and it is a powerful incentive in some other states. And finally, the Preservation Alliance has launched a forgivable loan program for the Parkside neighborhood of West Philadelphia, led by Committee Chair Donna Harris, We are taking applications now. It is just for that one neighborhood across from the Police Touch Museum, but we're hoping to use that as a pilot program to expand to other neighborhoods. Parkside has the distinction of being both a local and a national historic district. So it's got a lot of opportunity and demographics that really suggest that our assistance will make a big difference for homeowners there. Thank you, Donna.
I have a question over here. I'm curious about the investment of $100 into historic preservation, generating $45 of economic activity. I'm just hoping that you could explain a little bit more about what that $45 is including, and if there's a comparison between investing $100 in new construction, what does that generate in terms of economic activities or difference there?
If you were in my class at Penn, I'd come give you $1 for the great question that you had. Well, here's what, we get it from the econometric model, but here's what happens. So I'm doing the restoration of a historic building, but I gotta buy lumber. I gotta buy 2 or 4. And so that, I go to the lumber yard and I buy 2 or 4. So that is that secondary activity. So it's not just the dollars I spent, but that generates then economic activity elsewhere. There's what's called an indirect activity. So direct activity is going on in the building we're restoring. Indirect is what it took to buy it for that to take place. And then there's a piece called induced activity. Now that both the carpenter in the building we're doing, but the guy selling the 2x4s can go get a haircut on Saturday because of that chain of expenditures. So that's where that $42, $43 comes from, additional circulation of those dollars in the local economy. And by the way, these aren't, the total impacts. These are just the impacts in Philadelphia. All of our numbers are just what. So if there's some, maybe there was a, contractor from Delaware coming to do the work, but that's not included in these numbers. These are Philadelphia things. Now, as to the difference with new construction, it is decided because rehabilitation is more labor intensive. There's more of the total dollars go to human beings as opposed to sinks, to materials. That means there's a much bigger impact, revolving impact of a historic preservation project. And even in the secondary thing, is that huge difference in the amount of materials bought from local building supply shops with rehabilitation than there is with new construction. So if the only thing you cared about is jobs for people in Philadelphia, every time you're going to make the rehabilitation as opposed to new construction choice, because it has a significantly greater impact on the local economy.
Of course, a sore spot in an area where there is new development or rehabilitation in old neighborhoods is the problem of gentrification. And you have, of course, when you talk about affordability, now, of course, the real estate values will go up in those neighborhoods. And of course, the people who live in these old houses there, their taxes go up to a point where they can't afford to live there. What can be done, or what maybe is being done, to allow long-time residents in those old neighborhoods where new development is causing, higher real estate values? What can be done to allow these people to stay in their houses?
Well, the issue is it's a cash flow problem, not a wealth problem. The reason the taxes are going up is my will was worth $100,000 and now it's worth $200,000. It's just I'm living on a fixed income. I can't pay the taxes on the $200,000. And different places have different iterations of this, and not exactly is what I'm going to describe. But here's what could happen. The easiest thing in the world, say we don't want the taxes to run anybody out. You owe the taxes, you're still getting services from policemen and firemen and schools. So we're not going to let you off the hook from ever paying, but you don't have to pay until that wealth is achieved. When your kids do it, when you sell it, when you die, whatever, then those back taxes taxes can be picked up, the taxpayers ought to pay, but you're not running somebody out of their house because they have a cash flow problem, because they're gaining wealth. They're gaining a lot of wealth, but they have to move out to capture that wealth. So what do? We just wait. City of Philadelphia will not go broke if they just wait. I'm my age, I'm gonna die any minute now. Just wait until I do and defer those taxes. Now, a lot of places also have just simple caps for long-term residents, of older homes, so that the jumps don't take place or deferred. And so there's iterations of that, and I frankly don't know which proves to be.
One of the programs in Philadelphia many of you are familiar with is the Loop program, long-term owner-occupant program that does pretty much what Donovan. It's not a perfect solution, but it does cushion the blow and has helped a lot of homeowners in the city.
DAG-sponsored program to get people help with repairing their historic houses. That's like 12 years ago. And it was Mayor Parker who pushed that through council. She was very new on council, but she's the one who pushed it through council. Her emphasis has always been on what she calls the middle neighborhoods. And there has always been a lot of pushback because, especially you think about it in weather like this, the people who are unhoused, and what do you do for the people who can't afford housing. So it was the housing first versus the middle neighborhoods, sort of. I think that's a moral quandary that I can't even begin to think clearly about. But Donovan, in terms of the development of the city, putting in mind, and just this is kind of a cold-hearted approach, but putting those dollars toward the middle neighborhoods or toward housing the poorest. And I'm looking at this coldly. What's best for the city?
Well, I only have one positive characteristic as a human being, and that is I have no election to say I don't know. I do think that we've failed society if we don't take care of the least among us. That we've failed. So we've got to do it. And one of the wonderful things about the examples that Paul showed is how many of those were for homeless people or for whatever, people at the bottom of the range, suffering the most. And those. So the issue is that historic preservation can be part of the solution. Now, that kind of allocation of resources between the other side is that we have to have a working economy. That's why we need those middle households, and we don't want to lose them. We don't want to preclude young people who graduate from Penn want to stay here from being here. So we have to. I think it'd be a mistake to have a kind of an either-or proposition. I think it is that we have to figure out how to equitably distribute the resources that there are, so that we're not leaving people behind, but we're kind of also making the investments and make people stay here who are going to be the taxpayers to pay the rest of it.
So it's my suspicion that if we had a winter storm that dropped 10 inches of cash on Philadelphia, that we wouldn't be able to spend it on historic rehabilitation, given the limit of skilled restoration trades that we have. And I wonder whether you saw any evidence in your study whether that was throttling the economic activity in Philadelphia, and whether you have solutions from other cities you've studied for like raising supply to meet demand.
Well, a couple of things about that. One of the three of us had a Zoom call earlier in the week about this presentation, and an observation that I made is one of the reasons why Philadelphia is at the top of the big cities in terms of the use of the credit is that you have a set of skills in Philadelphia that's unusual on this whole chain of the kinds of humans you need. You have architects who know what they're doing, you have structural engineers know how to stabilize a building, you have financing people, you have developers, you have all of those along the way to make it happen. And that's not true every place. And it is a learning curve. You have to learn how to do it. have to be a kind of niche market to do it. So I think that's part of the reason you have so much activity. We didn't look at the trades issue in this study in Philadelphia, but about 2 years ago, we did a study on the heritage trades, or national study on the heritage trades. You're absolutely right. There's a shortage of skilled workers. And when the workers are trained and experienced in the area, there's a premium that they get paid. And so you here you have, now, if I were the economic development czar, here you have young people who are unemployed or underemployed. You have a skill set that does not require a college degree, but requires training and education. And with those skills, they get a long-term resource and income. It ought to be a top priority. You know, sometimes people say, well, you know, but that's stupid rehabilitation stuff. You rebuild the building, but then you're out of the job. Well, no. While buildings can stand 500 years, the components of buildings have a life, we'll just say, averages 30 years, 33 years, 35 years, something. Meaning, if a city committed to rehabilitate 3% of its buildings a year, you'd have perpetual employment in the construction trade. So here's an untapped opportunity, I think, for a priority economic development thing, is to figure out how, because you're right, shortage of skills around the country. And I think we identified 10 different trades involved somehow in the process. In every one of them, there was a shortage. So it's really a need, and it fits so many things. I can't quantify what's not being done because of the lack of skills, and I expect it's kind of mixed. But I'm telling you, there's jobs waiting to happen if there were people experiencing qualified to do it.
Also, I just want to plug that all of the PlaceEconomics studies, if you want to look at the one that Donovan just referenced, they make them available on their website. So if you want to look at something beyond Philadelphia, it's really exciting to kind of go through and see all of the work Donovan has done across the country. So just a plug to check out their website.
Hi, how you doing today? My name is Prince Sterling Davis. I represent Self-Respect News brand. I just want to know, like, I've been reading a book about cities and schools, education in schools. It talks about how it talks about magnet schools, which actually dropped my attention from the book. I just checked the book yesterday and had to just walk outside and see my city. Because I come from a magnet school myself, which is Meredith from Fitzwater. Is this becoming a magnet type school city? If you look up magnet schools, you know what I mean? Is this becoming a magnet type, like a magnet city? A magnet city? Like Chicago, DC, Brooklyn, and other cities like that?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to fall back on what Donovan said. I don't know. I don't think any of us are real experts on public education and the strategies that the school district is using. So I think that question is going to have to wait for another day.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, thank you very much for the report.
Thank you a lot.
Absolutely fascinating. The way that I read the report was it's sort of broken down into 3 categories, and you talked about that, so I don't want to spend too much time on that, but just so I can parse it myself as I prepare my question. One was housing pre-1950s and old housing, so that's housing that's kind of dilapidated, decayed over time. And then you've got the designated areas, historic areas, and then you've got projects that are you can attach HTC to. And so when capital flows, and I think we've lightly touched on this in a couple of the other questions, they don't flow, capital does not flow. There are no capital instruments to the first 2 categories, none whatsoever. So when we talk about the home program, and that's really thinking through the pre-1940s category, and we're talking about jobs and a lot of the things that HTC supports in terms of what that capital allocation can do. And the policy is written with preservation in mind, but when the investors get together and they sharpen their pencils and they think about how they're going to spend their money, they're not so much thinking about preservation, they're thinking about, can I defray my tax liability? I'm an oil company, I'm Google. You know, the jobs are secondary to whether or not I can offset my tax liability. So it's not really so much. So the question is, the preservation is downstream of the investment, and there's no way to receive in the first 2 categories of the district area and the housing pre-1950s, which the home program is really kind of lending itself to receive that capital. And we talked about instrument that does not exist. So you know, when you say HTC or preservation has to be part of that conversation, where's the money flowing? What is the capital instrument that's going to make that money flow? Because these investors aren't coming for those neighborhoods. I'd like to see it.
Well, I do think that's exactly the void that the mayor is trying to step into, and I think you said that too, that she is trying to redirect public dollars into those neighborhoods to accomplish the goal that you're implying needs to be met. It's not going to be enough, right? But it'll be more than we've seen in the city in a long time. I mean, the HTC projects, they do create jobs, they do preserve buildings, they do create housing and commercial space and so on. That's one part of the equation. But you're right, the pre-1950 neighborhoods across the city are not attracting investor dollars. The public sector has to step in to try to fill that gap, and I think that's what the mayor is trying to do, right?
She is, but that's not a preservation lens per se. That is let's put the roof back on the building and make sure that the families can persist in those houses. It's not necessarily a preservation lens.
We see preservation as including that. You know, keeping a roof on an older building, that is preservation. It doesn't have to be historically certified. Right. And for a lot of those neighborhoods, historic designation probably isn't appropriate, isn't justified by the criteria, and wouldn't necessarily be a help because, and you're actually getting me to a place I should have mentioned earlier, we do have a shortcoming in this city where when a property owner finds their property designated, there are no benefits flowing from that. And we've had discussions about that with the Preservation Task Force under Mayor Kenny, with Councilman Squilla. Could there be a tax advantage for historic designation? Could there be a trust fund available to homeowners whose properties are designated? These are ideas that we continue to discuss with members of City Council because we do think there needs to be an incentive for historic designation. But we're only talking about 5% of the city, 4.8, right, Hannah? So there's 95% of the city where that's not going to be a factor. Yet the preservation of those buildings is also important. As Donovan said, we're not going to build new out of the affordability crisis. We do need to keep the roofs on and the windows intact on these older, undesignated housing units as well.
Just one minor thing. There's a great federal program called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. In its lifetime, it has created about 3.2 million units of housing. That's wonderful. At the same time period, 11 million units of housing built prior to 1970 have been lost forever. Well, we're never going to do it if we're tearing down what we're building, what we're doing. Second thing, great, I wish our firm could take credit for it, but a great research firm looked at all of the tax credit, of the low-income housing tax credit projects. And again, this is lots of the buildings that maybe wouldn't fit the historic designation, but are older housing, is on average, nationally, on average, the per unit cost using the low-income housing tax credit for a new unit was about $215,000 per unit. The low-income housing tax credit units that were created in older buildings, including building acquisition, was $153,000. So I don't care if you like old buildings, you just want to save taxpayers money. The responsible action is to give the priority for older stuff. And yet half or more of all the low-income housing tax credit projects are new construction. There's a place to influence the capital stack, is if the state's housing authority, whatever it is here, that allocates the tax credit, say, we're only going to give it to stuff that you build because we want to stretch our dollars. We're only going to do it if you're doing old stuff. That would move Google's capital from point A to point B.
Got a question. Yes, Paul and Hannah, as you know, there's a lawsuit pending threatening the existence of the newly established West Philadelphia, Southwest Quadrant Historic District, a wonderful collection of
Not anymore.
That was actually upheld on December 19th.
The lawsuit was dismissed.
It's been dismissed, but that's my question.
Yay.
Let's hear it for that.
So, Southwest Eco Historic District, the appeal was denied.
That's
And 30
ground
days
for ground
has
for
gone by.
applause.
Yeah.
It's been dismissed.
Yeah.
Yes, and they cannot appeal it, it's already been 30 days.
Wow. Oh, that's grateful to this, to end the program here.
I'm sitting nowhere near the tables here. The mayor has done an interesting thing. She's asked for comments on a housing factory at the Logan Triangle in North Philadelphia, off of Roosevelt Boulevard. And of course, the site is huge, and it's only been vacant for 35 years or more, so it's a little young in Philadelphia terms. It would be nice to see some jobs there. It would be nice to see something happening. But having our own factory that makes modular buildings might entail some problems in the sense that the city might mandate a market to make sure the factory is viable. It would be nicer to have a factory that made historic building parts, things like that. But what would you advise the mayor regarding her request for comments on the modular housing factory from a preservation point of view?
It's a great question. I did see the news about that the other day, and my immediate reaction was, good idea. It's a site that needs something to happen, and her idea, I thought, made some sense. But we haven't really considered if and how we would respond to that. I think, George, you're throwing down the gauntlet challenge here. But we really should talk about that, and maybe you have some ideas on that you can help us with.
With that, I want to thank everybody here.
Eli,
Time
can I
here.
make a request?
I would love that. Go
Just
ahead.
one more, because we only have one member of the Historical Commission in the room, and his hand is up.
Yeah, there's real complexity to affordability. Right? It's not just the house, it's the availability of education, and so I'm looking at what are the other things that if we're saying we want to have more tax credits, that's great. Everybody gets a house, but they all have to send their kids to some other school. Or they have to buy a car because that only runs once an hour. So there are things that make a big difference. The other is, there are things that you would never be allowed to build that street today. And people love them. You can walk from the Schuylkill River to the Delaware, all on streets like that, several ways.
Right.
So part of it is also recognizing the public aspects that are absolutely critical and putting the investment in that. I think that's why, in the same manner that you talk about, having PH ethic, that's a housing finance agency, direct local housing credits to, with preference to historic buildings. The same thing in terms of street repair and transit and so forth, recognizing, we can tie that in with what are older neighborhoods. I mean, they don't, as you say, most of them don't have to be historic, but the Mayfairs and the Germantowns of the world, without transit or nothing. And also, the other thing that has happened is the Commerce Department, in trying to attract business, people come, well, the city wage tax and everything. Yeah, but they had a map at one time, which all the places you can live, all the businesses, where you wouldn't have to have a car. So if you're paying a wage tax, it takes 2% of your, or 3%, but you're saving thousands each year, aside from the other benefits. So I think it's an overall picture that's one of the resources we have in Philadelphia. And now we're getting it with our Greenway network. We talked about that. I think all the people in Southwest Philly would help. And starting in May, we'll be able to provide a bicycle from King Sensing to Center City in 20 minutes, no traffic, no danger, and also all the nice things about that. And of course, there's a whole historic element to the
Well, in response to that, what I would say is, there are many pillars of sustainable urban living that have been under assault in this country for a very long time, through zoning, through automobile-oriented development, and many other things. And so thank goodness that we have the design advocacy group to push back and I do, in closing, I want to make a public service announcement. As I've been sitting here, I've been realizing that one of the last times I was in this room was for the life celebration of Elise Veeder, who was a pillar of DAG and of the Preservation Alliance. So I do want to bring her memory to our minds as we sit here tonight. Thank you, Paul.
That memory certainly stays with me as well whenever we're in this space. So thank you. Please give them a large round of applause. We will be back here in 1 week, minus about 2 hours. So next Wednesday, same spot, come on back. Some of the snow will have melted away by then. The program starts again at 5:30. So thank you all for coming.